When I was 18, my parents told me that if I kept my baby, I was no longer their daughter. They never shouted. Looking back, I almost wish they had. Anger would have been easier to understand than the quiet certainty with which my father carried my suitcase to the front door. My mother stood behind him with folded arms. "You still have time to make the responsible choice," she said. I rested a hand over my stomach. I already did. The lock clicked behind me before sunset. For years I replayed that sound in my head, not because it made me hate them, but because it marked the moment I stopped expecting unconditional love from the people who had always promised. Raising my daughter wasn't glamorous. I worked mornings at a bakery, evenings answering phones for a plumbing company, and studied bookkeeping online whenever she fell asleep on my shoulder. There were nights when dinner was scrambled eggs because they were cheap. Birthdays happened in public parks instead of expensive venues. We owned secondhand furniture that never matched, but my daughter never wondered if she belonged. That mattered more than anything. The only person who never treated my past like a mistake was Evan. We met when he hired me to organize financial records for the community center where he worked. He never asked intrusive questions. He simply noticed that I always packed an extra snack because I worried someone else might need one. When he proposed, he did it in our kitchen while my daughter colored at the table. No audience, no speeches, just certainty. We planned a courthouse wedding because neither of us wanted a performance. Ironically, the only surprise arrived the morning of the ceremony, the DNA envelope. Years earlier, I'd agreed to genetic testing after my daughter's biological father requested legal confirmation before formally giving up parental rights. The process became tangled in administrative delays, misplaced records, and repeated requests. By the time the final report arrived, our lives had already moved forward. I almost left it unopened. Instead, curiosity won. The first page confirmed what I expected. The man everyone believed was my daughter's biological father was excluded. Zell probability. I stared at the report, convinced there had to be a mistake. Then I reached the attached explanation. Because another sample had been submitted during an earlier legal review involving my parents' attorney, the laboratory had performed an additional kinship analysis after identifying conflicting information. The results suggested something none of us had imagined. The man who raised me was almost certainly not my biological father. I read the sentence 3 times. Suddenly, years of accusations echoed differently. Dad had spent years insisting he knew exactly who had ruined my future. Science quietly informed us that certainty had never existed. I folded the papers back into the envelope. There would be time to process them later. Or so I thought. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of polished floors and old paper. Evan squeezed of my hand while my daughter spun carefully in her little dress, counting the tiles beneath her shoes. Then I heard my mother's voice. "There she is." I turned. My parents walked toward us as though they'd been invited. My mother's eyes never settled on me. They went directly to my daughter. "So that's our granddaughter. Not your daughter." Not even her name, just a relationship they had abandoned 7 years earlier. Dad cleared his throat. "We've missed enough. We'd like to meet her." I felt strangely calm. Maybe because grief had already finished its work years ago. "You don't get to demand introductions," I said quietly. Mom frowned. "We're family." The word landed without weight. Before I answered, I reached into my bag. I handed her the envelope. "I opened this morning." She looked confused but accepted it. Dad leaned closer while she unfolded the pages. Her face changed before she reached the bottom, color drained away. Dad looked over her shoulder. His lips barely moved. "That's not my—" He never finished. His eyes found mine instead. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. Mom whispered, "This can't be right." I thought the same thing. I answered. Silence settled between us. Not victorious, just unavoidable. My mother looked smaller somehow, not weaker, simply confronted by a truth no amount of certainty could overpower. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. The years of judgment suddenly rested on assumptions that no longer existed. A courthouse security officer approached with practiced calm. Is everything all right here? Before anyone else could answer, Evan smiled politely. We're ready for our ceremony. The officer nodded. This hallway needs to remain clear for scheduled proceedings. There was nothing dramatic about it, no threats. No raised voices. Just ordinary authority reminding everyone why we were there. My parents stepped aside because they had no choice. As we walked toward the courtroom, my daughter slipped her hand into mine. Mom? Yes? Are those people your friends? I looked back once, my parents were still standing together, reading the report again as if repetition might change it. No, I said gently. They're part of my past. She accepted that answer with the uncomplicated trust only children seem to possess. Minutes later, Evan and I exchanged vows before a judge, two witnesses, and the little girl who had unknowingly saved my life simply by giving me someone to keep choosing every day. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt lighter. The DNA report didn't erase the years we'd lost. It didn't repair my relationship with my parents, it didn't answer every question about my own identity, but it ended something important. For years, I'd believed I needed my parents to admit they were wrong before I could move forward. Standing beside my husband with my daughter's hand wrapped around two of my fingers, I finally understood that truth doesn't always restore a family. Sometimes it simply gives you permission to stop carrying its weight.